Hello and welcome to the Church of the Gotcha. If you are new to the channel, the point of these videos is not to go through every single rule in the Sisters Codex, but just to cover the things that you'll need to know if you're playing against Sisters. So, Alfred Various, do you want to start us off? What on Holy Terror are Miracle Dice?
So Miracle Dice is a really unique ability that the Adepta Sororitas get. So they'll get a new Miracle Dice at the start of each round, they will roll a dice and set those dice aside, and they can use them to substitute in for some of the rolls they make. Now, on the screen you'll see what they can use to substitute these in, but what's really strong about this is that they can, instead of relying on probability, make guaranteed charge rolls, saving throws. When there's something they really need to get done, they can save the dice for that and make sure that those things happen.
Yeah, it's an incredibly powerful ability. That Exorcist is not doing d6 damage, it could be doing 6 damage and there's nothing you can do about it. So Shield of Faith is an ability that many Sisters have, so this gives them a 6-up invulnerable save and it allows them to deny the Witch, but only on 1 dice. However, if they roll a 6, that power is denied no matter what. And they can also make this a 5 when they use a certain Sacred Rite. So Sacred Rites are abilities that a Sisters player can pick before the battle, so they can tailor if they're against Thousand Suns or against Grey Knights, for example, and they can make it so their auto-deny becomes a 5. And this is really strong because you can actually also use Purity of Faith after you've tried to deny the Witch, and this means that you'll be able to deny on a 5-up and then try and deny on a 4-up, and so you're going to have basically a 66% chance of denying any psychic power that you're within range of. The other Sacred Rites that they can have access to if they want to, and they can either pick 1 or roll for 2, and I've put them on the screen, but certainly on combat units, for example, they could get +1 to advance and charge or 6s to hit, score an additional hit in combat. They can be situationally really good.
That's right, and in addition, they have a relic called the Blessings of Sebastian Thor, which lets them put 2 Sacred Rites onto one of their units instead of the one that's active for the rest of the army. A couple other relics that we thought were interesting. You've got the Casket of Penitence, a 3-inch aura of -1 toughness, and if you're Chaos, also -1 strength. The Mantle of Ophelia is a really interesting relic that you can take on a Canoness. That'll decrease all the incoming damage onto her to just be 1 damage. Now there are a few different buffs and Warlord traits that you can put onto her in addition, which will make her even more survivable and give her abilities to heal herself. The reason you want to do that is there's a stratagem called Suffering and Sacrifice, which will force all enemies in engagement range to target that Canoness, which means that your other better units can be bodyguarded by this Canoness and mean that they don't get hurt at all in combat.
And then of course they have their own Warlord traits, some of which are quite interesting. So Indomitable Belief can give a +1 to the Shield of Faith invuln, and you can actually stack this with a hymn that we'll see later on to give core units a 4-up invuln. This can be even on basic Sisters of Battle to make them pretty survivable, and then there are a couple of faction specific ones just to mention. So they've got a 6-inch heroic intervention on Argent Shroud, and if you take Sacred Rose you get a 6-inch aura that allows units to fall back and charge. We're going to jump into the units then. So we're going to start off with Morven Val. So she's not so much of a gotcha, she's just really good. So not only is she a really great beat stick, but she also gives like full rerolls. She is the reroll queen for not only herself, but she'll also give rerolls to hit and wound, and she can make another core character reroll all hits and wounds. She's obviously got a 4-up invuln, she's got a 4-up Feel No Pain versus mortals, and she also halves damage because she's in a war suit. The normal war suits as well is probably worth mentioning. Currently say they just -1 damage. We're assuming at the point of recording this that that's going to be to a minimum of 1, so we haven't actually put it in the video.
Next up we've got Celestine, the Living Saint, and her Gemini Superior. Now, she is very good in combat and pretty good in shooting, but the thing to be aware of is that not only can she get up after she dies, but also she heroically intervenes 6 inches rather than the standard 3, so make sure you stay out of range of her whenever you're in your charge phase.
Then we have the most dangerous funeral procession in the game. It is the Triumph of St. Catherine. They have a whole bunch of relics that they lose as the Triumph degrades. I have put them on the screen for you to see. One just to take note of is the 6-inch aura that deals mortal wounds on a 5-up in the shooting phase, and they actually get +1 to this for psychers and if it's used against chaos, so that could be a lot of damage potentially. Then we have the greatest dynamic duo of 40k, we have Ephriel Sturm and Kaiganil. So they have a 4-up invuln and are -1 to be hit and wounded. Additionally, Kaiganil has a 5-up Feel No Pain, and this makes him pretty survivable because he has to be killed first. He also gets to fight first in combat, and they can negatively affect the morale of nearby chaos units, and Stern gets a kind of smite ability in the shooting phase. It does work pretty similarly to smite.
Just a note here that this makes me really sad as a Harlequins player, that there's a Harlequin. We have so few models already, why can't we use this Harlequin? It's not fair. So your Canoness or Palatine are two of the generic HQs that you can take as sisters, and the one way that you can upgrade them is with Blessings of the Faithful. Now these will have two parts. The first part is something that's always on and a buff for that character, and then the second part are the miraculous abilities. Now for those, they will burn a miracle dice in the command phase, and then that will determine the range of the miraculous ability, either 1 inch, 3 inches, or 6 inches, and some of these are really good. They're all on the screen now, but the ones that we want to mention is Word of the Emperor. Now the always on ability is that they can choose a unit within 3 inches to fight last. And then the miraculous ability, this is really good, is that when enemy models are within this range, their friendly core or character units can ignore invulnerable saves with their melee attacks, which is obviously super strong. Divine Deliverance is really interesting for the first part because it can turn off aura abilities of enemy models within 6 as long as you beat their leadership on 3d6.
I really like Emperor's Grace because they can start to heal those wounds that they lose through suffering and sacrifice, and the second part of the ability means that core and character units within range cannot have hits or wounds or damage rolls re-rolled against them. So this can be another thing that Sisters players can do to make their Sisters of Battle really tough. And the last named character we were just going to mention is Astrud Thurga and Agatha Dolan. This can be identified by the new massive banner that I'm sure that you saw on Warhammer Community. So they can buff a core unit nearby to get all the Sacred Right abilities, and they can allow a character within 6 inches to reroll 1 hit, 1 wound and 1 damage roll when fighting. And it's also probably worth mentioning that Thurga's Blade actually has one of those rules where Feel No Pains and ignoring wounds abilities don't work. So this can actually be pretty useful if you want to take the last couple of wounds off a Catan, for example.
So continuing the trend of Sisters of Battle going into battle with big banners and things rather than guns, you've got the Imagifier. She can hold one of 3 different types of banner, the most interesting one of which is rerolling advances and charge rolls for core units within 6.
And of course, the Sisters of Battle have their own version of an apothecary called the Hospitaller. Now she can not only heal D3 wounds to an infantry model, but she also gives that classic 6-up Feel No Pain to infantry nearby.
So next up, let's talk about some of the priests in the Sisters of Battle book. Of course, nuns with guns are also friends with lots of priests, and priests in this book can know one of several hymns of battle. Now the way these work is very similar to the Dark Apostle or the Chaplain. They all know the main hymn, the War Hymn, which gives +1 attack on 1 core or character unit.
It's also worth noting that like Chaplains, they have a strat to just get a hymn off if they haven't got a hymn off that turn. And of the priests that they have access to, it's just worth noting the Dialogus and the Dogmata. So the Dialogus can allow units nearby to modify the miracle dice that are used on them, and the Dogmata can give objective secured to a core unit nearby, and it can allow a core unit nearby to shoot whilst performing an action.
So the Celestians are the elite bodyguards of the Sisters. You've got 2 types. You've got the Celestian Squad, who are a bit more shooty, and you've got the Celestian Sacristants, who like shields. Both types of Celestians can stop characters from within 3 from being shot with their bodyguard abilities. And in addition, the Sacristants can also heroically intervene, so don't get too close to them if you can help it.
And it's worth noting here because many of the Sister Squads get access to the Incenser Cherub, and what this means is that they can spend this cherub once per game in a phase, and they essentially will get a miracle dice that only they can use, and they have to use it that phase, so it can be useful. And then the Celestians have some specific stratagems for them, so they can get +1 to hit, and the Celestian Sacrosants can get Inviolate Shield Wall. This means that they will be -1 to be wounded in the fight phase.
Next up we've got the Repentia. The Repentia Superior can make a nearby Repentia unit much faster by giving them advance and charge, and let them roll an extra d6 when charging, discarding the lowest. Now the Repentia themselves are very good in combat. They have a really strong stratagem, Desperate for Redemption, and for 2 CP, if they haven't fought yet and they die, they can fight on death.
For Dominions, it's worth mentioning that they get a pre-game move, and this can actually be done from inside of a vehicle, so you can get some immolators moving up towards your lines before the game has even begun. And then the Sisters have their own jump pack troops, so they have the Zephyrin and the Seraphim. The Zephyrin can take a banner to give a reroll charges aura to core, which is pretty nice, and there are a bunch of strats that affect these units. So Zephyrin can get +1 to wound in combat, Seraphim can shoot immediately after they've come in from reserves, and you can pick a jump pack unit off of the board at the start of your movement phase and deploy it as a reinforcement in your next turn if you want to get those deploy scramblers, etc.
On to heavy support choices. You've got the Retributors, who are the Sisters carrying heavy weapons. They can also take an Armorium Cherubs, who allow one model to shoot twice, once per game.
If you've played Sisters before, you might have noticed that they've lost their ability to move and shoot heavy weapons without penalty. However, as Argent Shroud, they can actually move and advance and shoot heavy weapons without penalty, so do be careful of that one. And Retributors might be a good target for Holy Trinity. This is a stratagem that gives +1 to wound. Now you can only do it if you fire Melter, Flamer and Bolt weapons at the same target. The Retributor Superior can get access to a Combi Flamer, and this can mean that they'll be quite likely to get access to this stratagem.
Other heavy support choices, you've got the Mortifiers and the Penitent Engines. These are the walking sarcophagi of death. The Mortifiers, of course, they can fight on death on a 4+, and the Penitent Engines, they can pile and consolidate 5 inches, but neither one of these units can perform actions because they are too crazy. They also have access to some interesting stratagems. With Righteous Impact, they can do mortal wounds when they charge a unit, and with Final Redemption, when they're killed in combat, on a 4-up, the attacking unit takes mortal wounds. It's worth noting that these units and the Repentia are Zealots, which means that when they charge, they get to reroll their hits in combat. And a lot of these Zealot units also have 5-up Feel No Pains to represent them shrugging off their pain because of their faith in the Emperor.
And then all of the stratagems that we haven't mentioned so far that it would be good for you to know, so they can get max shots on any of their flamer weapons, the Archoflagellants can get extra attacks, and they can get a stratagem that allows them to kill Psykers much more easily.
Other strats, they've got a strat to bring non-named characters back from the dead, but once per battle. They can modify their hit, wound, or saving rolls after they've made them by discarding miracle dice, and they can return models to core infantry units after they've died.
And it can be quite difficult to shift those models in the first place because they can basically get transhuman physiology on their Battle Sister squads if they're by an objective marker. And if they do this, they also get to count their rapid fire weapons as just having double the shots instead of the normal rapid fire weapon rules. In terms of gotchas, probably just a good time to mention that if you are against the Order of a Martyred Lady, try not to just kill one model in the unit, because that's going to give them access to +1 to hit for the rest of the unit for the rest of the game. They can also give their core units access to one of 2 abilities. In the charge phase, they can allow them to charge even if they fell back, or they can give them access to reroll hits if they make the charge that turn, or if they have heroically intervened this turn. And as well as being able to fall back and charge, they are also able to fall back and shoot with another stratagem. Now when you're against the Sisters of Battle, their Storm Bolters and their Flamers are actually just a bit more powerful than normal Storm Bolters and Flamers because they've been blessed, and they get access to a stratagem that means that their Storm Bolters can do mortal wounds when shooting.
Things to watch out for the vehicles of the Sisters of Battle. They've got stratagems to auto-explode the Immolators. Exorcist units can ignore line of sight when they're shooting its big piano using a stratagem. And also, just like a lot of the Space Marine units, they've got Smokescreen as a keyword for a lot of their units, which gives them -1 to be hit when they get shot at. If you've got a Psychic Heavy army, try not to be within 12 inches of any of their tanks, because they have a stratagem where if you fail a Psychic test, you will immediately suffer Perils of the Warp.
And then, of course, they have some order-specific strats that are pretty useful for them. So our Martyred Lady can get +1 to wound against a unit that killed one of their characters. Valorous Heart can ignore modifiers when shooting or fighting. Ebon Chalice can improve their flamer weapons and do mortal wounds with them. And Argent Shroud can actually get a 4-up Feel No Pain versus mortal wounds through their sheer faith. And that is all for today, folks. So thank you very much for listening to this video. Please do like and subscribe, it really helps us out, and we'll see you for the next one.